Hello everybody, my name is Elena Mihalcea, and please let me present you the poster I prepared for the 34th International Material Research Congress 2026. The name of my poster is Sintering Kinetics Analysis of Titanium-64 with Tungsten Carbide Composites by coupling dilatometry and computed tomography. Let's begin with the abstract. So, this work aims to investigate the sintering evolution of the titanium-64 matrix composites reinforced with tungsten carbide particles. And these particles act as an inert inclusions. Well, in order to achieve our goal, composites with different tungsten carbide particle quantities were prepared. So we used 5%, 10%, and 20% of this type of particles, and we prepare them by dry mixing. So then the powder mixtures were poured into an 8 mm diameter stainless steel die and were subjected to an axial compaction. All right, so the green samples were then sintered. So the sinterization took place at a temperature of 1200 degrees Celsius, and that for 1 and 5 hours, and all this under high purity argon atmosphere. The characterization was performed by a computed microtomography, also known by the name of micro-CT. And we also use the Scanning Electron Microscopy, also known as SEM, so for the characterization of these composites. Well, the results indicate that the sintering kinetics are slowed by the addition of the tungsten carbide particles, and that's because they form an interconnected net. Especially when 20% of this type of particle were used. The next size between the titanium-64 particles were reduced when the titanium-64 particle had some of these tungsten carbide particles in the neighborhood. The coordination number of the particles of the titanium-64 drive densification for lower quantities of tungsten carbide particles. The microstructure analysis showed that like a diffusion zone developed at the interface between the titanium and tungsten carbide samples, and especially when we sinter them for 5 hours. Besides, the typical lamellar structure that the titanium-64 particle present, and the titanium particles in general present, was conserved despite the formation of this interface that we observed. Also, the pore curvature was measured, and this was done from the 3D images, and under different sintering conditions. Well, all these results, also coupled with the next size and the actual shrinkage, data that we obtained from dilatometry, allowed us to propose a model to understand the densification of the composites when inert particles are used as reinforcing materials. We are talking about the tungsten carbide particles. All right, very good. That's all for the abstract. Let's continue with the experimental method. So the first step was the mixtures of the powders. Let's have a closer look. Okay, just a minute. So let's talk about the mixture of powders. Well, it's not that complicated. We have the titanium and the tungsten carbide particles. Basically, we are going to mix. So the initial powders of the Ti64 and tungsten carbide were weighted to obtain composites with 5, 10, and 15 volume percent of tungsten carbide, as we mentioned. All right, so after that, these powders were poured into a plastic container, and then we mix them under dry condition for 30 minutes, and that in a tubular mixer. In here we can, it's a very simple, very known machine. Okay. Well, let's continue with the second step, and this was the uniaxial compaction. We've done that in an Instrom with the help of an Instrom University testing machine. So this is a photo of the Instrom machine, and we did the compaction at 500 megapascals. At the pressure of 500 megapascal. In here we can have a look of the sample we obtained, and our sample had 3 millimeters wide and high. Okay, the next step, we use a tomograph. Well, we did tomographies of our samples. We use for that nanotomograph. The model is 510 Versa from Zeiss. Here we have an image of this of the interior of the tomograph. So I have to mention that we put our samples and we took tomographies before sintering and after sintering. Well, so the tomography images were done. We've realized 1,600 radiographies around 360 degrees, and and this at 120 kilowatts and 10 watts with a voxel resolution of 10 micrometers. Well, I was mentioning that we sintered our samples. So for that, we use a vertical dilatometer. Here we have an image of this machine, the vertical dilatometer. So the sintering conditions were 1,200 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes under an argon atmosphere. Okay. Well, we also have another additional 2 steps for the microstructure characterization of the sintered sample. And we've done that by using SEM, scanning electron, the scanning electron microscopy, and we also use a micro hardness machine for in order to obtain the micro hardness of our samples. All right. That's all for the experimental method. We are going to continue with the results. So first of all, these are the results. Let me begin by presenting you these 2 graphs. So these 2 graphs are dilatometry curves that we obtained during the sintering with the vertical dilatometer. The dilatometer is connected to a computer, to a PC, and we can obtain this type of curves. So this one is the actual strain versus time in seconds, and the other one is the time and temperature, and the other is the strain rate versus time and temperature. And well, in both of them, we can observe that we have different curves. So in yellow, we have the temperature. And then we have, for the samples, we have 4 curves. In black, we have for Titanium-64, with no addition of other particles. And then in red, we have for the addition with 5% of tungsten carbide particles, in blue for 15%, and in green for 10%. And it's the same thing in here. So for basically from this dilatometry curve, we can conclude that the shrinkage is reduced as the volume of the tungsten carbide particles increased. And in this one, in this of the strain rate versus time, we can conclude that the addition of these new particles of tungsten carbide retards the sintering activation, and the strain rate is also slowed by the WC particles. Okay, so let's continue with the SEM images. So the images you obtain from the electronic microscope. So from this electron microscope, we can obtain this type of images, and in here is the EDS mapping. EDS mapping helps us see what are the components in our sample. So we can see we have the tungsten, we have the titanium. So the tungsten is in green and titanium in red. And another thing that we can see from these images is that the tungsten carbide particles diffuse. We can see this zone of diffusion, diffuse into the Titanium-64 particles during the sintering. So we can see it's creating like an interface bonding. Okay, let's continue here with these images. These are 2D virtual slices obtained for the tomography, from the tomography images. For example, this image is the gray level image, but 3 different phases were segmented from the 3D images. So one for the Titanium-64 and one for the particles of the particles of the Titanium-64 and for the particles of the tungsten carbide, and also we have one for the pores. Okay, so this one is the binary image for the Titanium-64. This one we can see the particles of the tungsten carbides, and this one, in this binary image, we can see the pores. Okay. Last thing I'm going to present you are the results we obtained from the tomography. So in here we have the 3D volume rendering. So in here in the upper line we have the 3D volumes before sintering, and in here in the upper line, bottom line, we have the 3D volumes after sintering. So we can see we have some very nice images that we obtained. So these ones are for the Titanium-64 with 15% of tungsten carbide particles. This one for 5%. This before sintering. In this type of 3D rendering, what we represented is the streamlines throughout the porosity. So what we can see is that the porosity is interconnected, so it permits like the flow, like if we simulate a flow through this porosity, we obtain this type of simulation. Okay. So in here we have, for example, the tungsten carbide particles. in this 3D image, and in this type of images we have, for example, the titanium-64 particles together with the tungsten carbide particles, all together represented. See? All right. So after sintering, we have the same thing. We have a 3D volume rendering for the streamlines throughout the porosity. Another one in here for the WC particles when we have 15% of them. And in here is the 3D volume rendering with all the particles, basically. Well, from these 3D images we obtained from the tomography, if we take out the values before and after sintering, we can have the relative density and the permeability for the three types of samples we use, with 5%, 10, and 15% of tungsten carbide added to the titanium-64. And so we obtain these values, as we can see in here, and after sintering we also have the densification values. Well, so seeing all these values, from all these values, we can conclude that the densification is affected by the formation of the clusters of tungsten carbide particles. Also, we can say that 20% or more pores remain after sintering, and this depending on the tungsten carbide addition. And also that the permeability is reduced after sintering due to the pore reduction. Nevertheless, the values agreed with the compact bones. Okay? We are talking about the compact bones because we are interested in this type of materials to use them for biomedical applications. See, for this is our interest in this type of materials. Okay, so let me finish with the conclusions. So the porous composites of Titan64 with tungsten carbide particles were successfully fabricated by pressing and sintering. So the densification is reduced as the WC particles content increases, because the WC particles form like a rigid structure inside the titanium-64 particle packing, which inhibits the shrinkage due to mass diffusion. Okay, we also concluded that the tungsten carbide reacts with the titanium-64 particles and diffuses to form like an interface bond that makes a better attachment of the WC particles inside the matrix. Also, the 3D images acquired before and after sintering allow us to determine that the WC distribution inside the matrix, well, we already seen that we can have a good picture of what happens inside our samples with the acquisition of 3D images. This will serve to follow these particles in order to determine their mobility and the effect on the densification. Also, another conclusion was that the porous composites are obtained with fully connected pores, as we've seen from these images. And a volume fraction larger than 20%. Permeability is reduced by the densification. However, the values are still in the range of those reported for compact bones, which could promote cell proliferation, thus bone regeneration. You know, as we mentioned, all this is for implants, bone implants for biomedical application. Well, that's all. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and wish you have a pleasant day. Bye bye.